This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome, curious listeners. Today, we're diving into one of nature's most fascinating mix-ups, bats versus birds. Both take to the skies with seemingly effortless grace, but that's where the similarities end. We'll explore what makes these flying creatures fundamentally different, from their evolutionary origins to their unique adaptations. You'll discover why a bat is more closely related to you than to any bird, and how these two groups conquered the air through completely different paths. Get ready to see the skies in a whole new light. Chapter 1. Two Paths to Flight. When we look up at the sky and see creatures soaring overhead, it's easy to assume that anything capable of flight must share a close evolutionary relationship. After all, flight is such a complex and remarkable ability that it seems logical it would have evolved only once, perhaps in a common ancestor that then gave rise to all flying animals. Yet this assumption could not be further from the truth. The reality of how flight evolved on Earth tells a far more fascinating story, one that reveals the extraordinary power of natural selection to arrive at similar solutions from entirely different starting points. Flight has evolved independently at least 4 distinct times in the history of life on Earth. Insects were the first to take to the air, developing wings more than 300 million years ago. The extinct pterosaurs evolved flight separately from their earthbound reptilian ancestors during the Mesozoic era. Birds took wing from their theropod dinosaur ancestors around 150 million years ago. And finally, bats evolved the ability to fly from small terrestrial mammals roughly 50 to 60 million years ago, creating a gap of nearly 100 million years between these two vertebrate groups achieving flight. Each of these groups developed wings and the ability to fly without inheriting these traits from a common flying ancestor. This is the essence of convergent evolution, the independent development of similar features in organisms that are not closely related. To understand how this remarkable convergence occurred, we must examine 3 fundamental questions. When did each group evolve flight, and from what ancestors? What evidence proves these evolutionary events were truly independent? And what does this tell us about how evolution solves complex problems? The evolutionary gulf separating birds and bats is vast beyond comprehension. Birds belong to the class Aves and are, in fact, living dinosaurs, their lineage tracing back through the theropods, the group of bipedal carnivorous dinosaurs that included Tyrannosaurus rex and Velociraptor. Bats are mammals through and through, classified in the order Chiroptera, which translates from Greek as hand-wing. They are more closely related to humans, whales, and elephants than they are to any bird. The last common ancestor shared by birds and bats lived more than 300 million years ago during the Carboniferous period, long before either group had evolved anything resembling a wing. This ancestor was a small, primitive tetrapod that walked on 4 legs and had no adaptations whatsoever for aerial life. From this unremarkable creature, 2 completely separate evolutionary paths would eventually lead to the skies. But those paths would not begin their journeys toward flight for another 150 million years or more. This temporal separation is crucial to understanding convergent evolution. Birds evolved flight during the Jurassic period, approximately 150 million years ago. Bats did not take to the air until the early Eocene epoch, roughly 50 to 60 million years ago. This means that for nearly 100 million years, birds flew alone among vertebrates. By the time the first bat flapped its wings, birds had already diversified into thousands of species and had spread across the globe. The two groups did not evolve flight in response to each other or in competition with each other. They evolved flight independently, separated by a chasm of time as vast as the evolutionary distance between them. The fossil record provides our first line of evidence for these independent origins. Birds evolved from a lineage of small, feathered theropod dinosaurs. These dinosaurs were already bipedal, and they already possessed feathers, though initially these feathers likely served purposes unrelated to flight, such as insulation or display. The transition from ground-dwelling dinosaur to flying bird involved numerous anatomical changes that accumulated gradually over millions of years. The forelimbs became modified for flight. The breastbone developed a prominent keel for anchoring massive flight muscles. The skeleton became lighter. The tail shortened dramatically. The fossil record preserves beautiful transitional forms that document this evolutionary journey. Archaeopteryx, discovered in limestone quarries in Germany, lived approximately 150 million years ago and represents one of the earliest known birds. This remarkable creature possessed a mix of reptilian and avian features. It had teeth in its jaws, a long bony tail, and clawed fingers on its wings, all characteristic of its dinosaurian heritage. Yet it also had asymmetrical flight feathers and a wishbone, features associated with modern birds. Beyond Archaeopteryx, paleontologists have discovered numerous other transitional fossils. Microraptor, a four-winged dinosaur from China, shows that early experiments in flight may have involved different configurations than we see in modern birds. The progression from ground-dwelling dinosaurs to fully aerial birds involved numerous intermediate forms, each with its own unique combination of ancestral and derived traits. Bats emerged from a completely different evolutionary trajectory. Their ancestors were small terrestrial mammals that likely resembled modern shrews or rodents. These animals were quadrupedal, walked on all fours, and had no adaptations for flight. The earliest known bat fossil, Onychoniteris fenii, was discovered in rock formations in Wyoming and dates to approximately 52 million years ago. This ancient bat already possessed fully developed wings and was clearly capable of powered flight, though its wing proportions suggest it may not have been as agile in the air as modern bats. Interestingly, Onychoniteris had claws on all 5 of its fingers, not just the thumb like modern bats, suggesting it was still adapted for climbing and that the transition to fully aerial life was not yet complete. The fossil record for bats is less complete than that for birds, partly because their delicate skeletons don't preserve as well. The fossils we do have, like Onychoniteris and the slightly later Aerodynamics, show that by the time bats appear in the fossil record, they were already accomplished flyers. This suggests that the key transitional forms, the gliding or poorly flying ancestors of bats, lived even earlier and have yet to be discovered. The rapid appearance of fully developed bat flight in the fossil record indicates that the transition from terrestrial mammal to flying bat may have occurred relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, though quickly still means millions of years. Recent research has even proposed that flight might have originated multiple times within bats themselves. A 2020 study suggested that powered flight could have evolved independently 3 separate times within the bat lineage, in the groups Yongochiroptera, Parapodeae, and Rhinolophoidea. While a 2022 response paper rejected this hypothesis, arguing for a single origin of bat flight, the very existence of this scientific debate illustrates how complex and difficult it can be to reconstruct evolutionary history, even with modern molecular and computational tools. Whether flight evolved once or multiple times in bats, all evidence confirms that bat flight evolved entirely independently from bird flight. Molecular evidence provides the strongest proof that bats and birds evolved flight separately. When scientists compare the DNA sequences of genes involved in wing development and flight, they find that bats and birds have evolved different genetic solutions to the same problem. The genes that promote finger elongation in bats are not the same as those that control wing development in birds. The proteins that affect bone growth and limb development show distinct patterns of change in each lineage. If bats and birds had inherited flight from a common flying ancestor, we would expect to see similar genetic mechanisms underlying their wing development. Instead, the molecular evidence reveals completely different developmental pathways producing superficially similar outcomes. This genetic divergence extends beyond just the genes directly involved in wing formation. The entire suite of adaptations required for powered flight, enhanced metabolism, specialized respiratory systems, modifications to skeletal structure, has evolved through different molecular mechanisms in the two groups. The convergence we observe in the physical form of wings and in the ability to fly is not reflected at the genetic level. This is precisely what we would expect if flight evolved independently in these two lineages, and it is powerful confirmation of what the fossil record suggests. The independent evolution of flight in bats and birds demonstrates several important principles about how evolution works. First, it shows that evolution is not goal-directed. Neither mammals nor dinosaurs were trying to evolve flight. Instead, flight emerged through the gradual accumulation of small changes, each of which provided some advantage in its own right. Perhaps the ancestors of bats began by leaping between branches to escape predators or reach food sources, then began to glide short distances as skin membranes developed between their limbs. Each improvement in aerial ability, however modest, provided better access to food or improved escape from predators, and natural selection favored individuals with those improvements. The same stepwise progression likely occurred in the dinosaur lineage leading to birds, perhaps beginning with feathered dinosaurs that used their proto-wings for display, then discovered that they could use them to extend jumping distance, and eventually achieved true powered flight. Second, convergent evolution reveals that there are often multiple solutions to the same problem. Flight can be achieved with feathers projecting from a fused skeletal framework or with skin membranes stretched between elongated fingers. Both solutions work, but each has different strengths and limitations suited to different ecological niches. The membrane wing provides superior maneuverability and the ability to make tight turns. The feathered wing is more efficient for sustained flight and can better handle damage. Neither design is absolutely superior. Each represents a different optimization strategy, a different set of trade-offs. Third, the convergent evolution of flight shows that similar environmental challenges can produce similar adaptations even in vastly different organisms. Both bats and birds needed to generate lift, minimize drag, and maintain stability in the air. The laws of physics don't care whether an animal is a mammal or a bird. The aerodynamic requirements are the same. Natural selection, working with different raw materials in each lineage, birds with their inherited feathers and dinosaurian bipedalism, bats with their mammalian skin and quadrupedal body plan, produced wings that, despite their fundamental structural differences, both obey the same principles of aerodynamics and achieve the same fundamental goal of controlled movement through air. The significance of this convergent evolution extends beyond mere academic interest. It teaches us that evolution is remarkably creative, capable of producing sophisticated adaptations multiple times independently. It demonstrates that there is no single best way to fly, no optimal solution that all flying animals must converge upon. The very existence of successful flying animals with such radically different wing designs shows that evolution can find multiple pathways to the same functional endpoint, with each pathway shaped by the unique history, constraints, and opportunities of its particular lineage. When we observe bats and birds sharing the skies today, we are witnessing the result of two separate experiments in the evolution of flight. Experiments separated by hundreds of millions of years and starting from completely different ancestral conditions. One experiment began with feathered dinosaurs and produced the incredible diversity of modern birds, from hummingbirds to albatrosses, from penguins to eagles. The other experiment began with small, furry mammals and produced the only flying mammals on Earth, more than 1,400 species adapted to nearly every conceivable aerial niche in temperate and tropical regions worldwide. This parallel evolution of flight represents one of nature's most spectacular examples of convergent evolution, a testament to the power of natural selection to shape life in response to environmental challenges. The fact that two such different groups of animals independently evolved the ability to fly reveals the flexibility and creativity inherent in the evolutionary process. It reminds us that while the outcome may appear similar when we see wings in the sky, the journey to get there can take radically different paths, each shaped by the unique history and constraints of its lineage. In the chapters that follow, we will examine the details of how these two solutions to flight actually differ. We will explore the fundamental structural differences between membrane and feather, the contrasting mechanics of how bats and birds move through air, the performance characteristics that make birds superior long-distance migrants, and the ecological adaptations that have allowed both groups to thrive while partitioning the aerial environment between them. Understanding these differences, built upon the foundation of their independent evolutionary origins, will reveal not just how bats and birds fly, but why each flies the way it does. Chapter 2. Membrane and Feather. When you examine a bat wing and a bird wing side by side, the differences are immediately striking. These are not subtle variations on a theme, but rather two fundamentally different solutions to the problem of creating a surface that can generate lift and thrust. Understanding these structural differences reveals the distinct design philosophies that evolution has explored in achieving vertebrate flight. The bat wing represents one of the most dramatic modifications of the mammalian body plan ever to evolve. The framework consists of the same bones found in your own arm and hand, but stretched and elongated to extraordinary proportions. The upper arm bone, or humerus, connects to the shoulder just as it does in other mammals. From there, the forearm bones, the radius and ulna, extend outward. But it's what happens at the hand that makes bat wings truly remarkable. In most mammals, including humans, the hand consists of relatively short finger bones. In bats, these finger bones, specifically digits 2 through 5, have transformed into slender struts that can reach lengths several times that of the forearm bones. The thumb remains short and bears a claw useful for climbing and gripping, but the other 4 fingers fan out to create a framework not unlike the ribs of an umbrella. The second finger extends forward from the wrist, while the third, fourth, and fifth fingers spread behind it. These bones are hollow, but differ importantly from the hollow bones of birds. Batwing bones are considerably less stiff than the bones in most vertebrate limbs, a consequence of their extreme elongation and relative thinness. The finger bones, despite their length, are remarkably thin and delicate. Handle a bat skeleton with care, and you'll notice how fragile these structures feel. This reduced stiffness is actually part of the wing's design, allowing the bones to flex slightly under aerodynamic loads while the surrounding membrane distributes forces across the entire structure. Yet in life, embedded in the elastic membrane and animated by muscle, they are far more robust than they appear. Between these elongated finger bones stretches the patagium, the technical term for the wing membrane. This is no ordinary piece of skin. The patagium is a highly specialized structure, thin enough to be nearly translucent in some species, yet strong enough to withstand the forces of flight. When examined closely, the membrane reveals a complex internal architecture. It contains multiple layers of tissue, including networks of elastic fibers composed of elastin and collagen that give it remarkable stretch and resilience. These proteins allow the membrane to deform substantially without tearing, a flexibility that rigid structures cannot match. Blood vessels course through the membrane in intricate patterns, visible when a bat hangs backlit in bright light. These vessels don't just supply the tissue with nutrients and oxygen, they also form part of the wing's sensory network and serve in temperature regulation. The membrane's rich vascularization makes it a living, responsive structure that can adapt to changing conditions. Perhaps most remarkably, the patagium contains muscle fibers woven through its structure. These are not the large, powerful muscles that drive the wing beat itself. Those are anchored to the chest and back. Rather, these are small muscles embedded within the membrane that allow the bat to adjust the tension and camber of the wing surface in different regions independently. With independent fingers acting as adjustable struts and muscles distributed throughout the membrane, the structure permits continuous and asymmetric shape changes. The bat doesn't have to extend both wings to the same degree. Each wing can be configured differently, a capability that the skeletal architecture makes possible. The membrane extends beyond just the space between the fingers. In most bat species, it continues along the side of the body, connecting to the hind leg, usually at the ankle. Many species also have a membrane between the hind legs, incorporating the tail, called the uropatagium. This creates a continuous surface spanning from fingertip to fingertip and down to the hind limbs. The presence and size of this tail membrane varies among bat families, reflecting different evolutionary paths within the order Chiroptera. Now contrast this with the bird wing, a structure built on entirely different principles. The bird wing also begins with the upper arm bone, the humerus, but from there the similarities largely end. The forearm of a bird contains the radius and ulna, just as in bats and other vertebrates, but these bones have different proportions and serve a different structural role. Beyond the forearm, the hand bones in birds have undergone an equally dramatic but completely different transformation. In birds, the separate bones of the wrist and hand have fused together into a single, rigid structure called the carpometacarpus. Where bats have 5 separate, flexible fingers providing independent control, birds have essentially one fused structure with only traces of individual digits remaining. This fusion creates a solid unit that can withstand powerful forces without bending or twisting. Depending on the species, you might see remnants of 2 or 3-digit elements, but these are incorporated into the rigid framework rather than serving as independent struts. This rigid hand structure serves as the anchor point for the flight feathers. These feathers, not the bones themselves, create the actual lifting surface of the wing. The primary flight feathers, called remiges, attach along the fused hand bones and extend backward, creating the outer portion of the wing. These are the longest, strongest feathers, arranged in a precise overlapping pattern. Secondary flight feathers attach along the ulna bone of the forearm, adding surface area to the inner wing. Tertiary feathers connect the wing to the body. The arrangement follows a consistent pattern across all bird species, though the exact number and proportion of feathers varies. Each flight feather is a marvel of biological engineering. The central shaft, or rachis, is hollow yet strong, made of keratin, the same protein that forms your fingernails. Branching from this central shaft are thousands of smaller structures called barbs, which in turn bear even smaller structures called barbules. These barbules interlock with tiny hooks, creating a smooth, continuous surface that air cannot easily pass through. When a feather becomes disrupted, the interlocking can be restored, though this requires the bird's active maintenance. The structure of individual feathers is not uniform. The leading edge of each primary flight feather is narrow and rigid, while the trailing edge is broader and more flexible. This asymmetry is built into the feather's physical structure. The barbules on the 2 sides of the feather also differ. Those on the leading side have more hooks and lock together more tightly, creating a stiffer edge. This asymmetric construction turns each feather into an airfoil with properties determined by its material structure. Beyond the primary and secondary flight feathers, birds have multiple layers of contour feathers covering the wing surface. These smaller feathers smooth the wing's profile and overlap like roof shingles, each one lying atop the next in a pattern that prevents air from flowing through gaps. At the leading edge of the wing, a small group of feathers called the alula attaches to what remains of the thumb. This small feather group can be raised independently due to the muscles and ligaments at its base. The material properties of feathers versus membrane create fundamentally different structural characteristics. Keratin, the protein forming feathers, is lightweight, strong, and relatively inflexible. A feather can bend only so much before it breaks, though feathers are replaced during seasonal molts. The membrane of a bat wing, made primarily of skin with embedded collagen and elastin fibers, is far more flexible and elastic. It can stretch substantially without tearing and has considerable capacity for self-repair if damaged. Small tears in bat wings are common and heal relatively quickly through the normal processes of tissue regeneration. The trade-off is that membrane is more vulnerable to punctures in the first place, while feathers, once properly aligned and in good condition, are quite resistant to damage. The way these structures attach to the body also differs significantly. Bird wings connect to an extremely rigid torso. The vertebrae in a bird's back are fused together, and the ribs are reinforced with small bony projections that overlap like armor plating. This creates a solid box, essential because the massive flight muscles need a stable platform to work against. The breastbone, or sternum, has a prominent vertical ridge called the keel running down its center. The enormous pectoral muscles that power the downstroke attach to this keel. In flying birds, these flight muscles can account for up to 30% of the total body weight. Bats also have substantial flight muscles, but their torso remains more flexible than that of birds. The vertebrae don't fuse, and the rib cage maintains some mobility. This flexibility is part of the overall design. The attachment points for the wing membrane to the body are also muscular, allowing adjustment of how much wing area is deployed and how the membrane connects to the torso. The primary flight muscle, the pectoralis, attaches to the sternum and provides the downstroke power. Bats also have well-developed muscles on the back and shoulders that control wing positioning throughout the stroke cycle. These structural differences lead to different maintenance requirements and vulnerabilities. Birds spent considerable time preening, using oil from a gland near the base of the tail to waterproof their feathers, and carefully realigning any barbs and barbules that have become separated. Feathers wear out over time, becoming frayed and less effective, which is why birds undergo periodic molts, shedding old feathers and growing new ones. This process is energetically expensive and happens gradually to avoid leaving the bird unable to fly. Some large birds, like eagles, may take several years to complete a full molt cycle. Bats face different maintenance challenges. The wing membrane must remain pliable and intact. Bats groom their wings regularly, licking the membrane to keep it clean and perhaps to maintain its flexibility. The membrane requires good blood circulation to stay healthy and functional. Unlike feathers, which must be fully replaced when significantly damaged, bat wing membranes can heal from injury. Studies have shown that small tears and punctures can close within weeks, with the tissue regenerating to restore the membrane's structural and functional integrity. The weight implications of these two wing designs are noteworthy. Feathers add surprisingly little weight. A bird's entire plumage, including all body feathers and the flight feathers, typically accounts for only a small percentage of total body mass. This is one reason feathers work so well for creating wing surfaces. They provide a large area without adding much weight. The hollow bones further reduce the weight of the wing structure itself. Bat wings are necessarily heavier because the membrane, thin as it is, still has more mass than an equivalent surface area of feathers. The elongated finger bones, though hollow, add weight. The muscles embedded in the membrane add more weight. The living tissue requires blood flow, which adds both fluid mass and the circulatory infrastructure. This is likely one reason that bats, despite being incredibly diverse and successful, never evolved to be as large as the largest flying birds. The largest bat species, some of the flying foxes, can have wingspans approaching 2 meters, impressive but still smaller than the wingspans of large albatrosses or condors, which can exceed 3 meters. The sensory capabilities embedded in these wing structures also differ substantially. Bird wings have sensors, primarily at the base of the feathers, that detect feather position and the forces acting on each feather. These mechanoreceptors provide feedback about wing configuration and aerodynamic loading. Bat wings are even more richly innervated. The membrane contains numerous nerve endings that can detect pressure, stretch, and subtle changes in tension across the surface. This creates a tactile sense that provides detailed information about the aerodynamic forces acting on the wing. The high density of sensory receptors in the membrane gives bats extraordinary feedback about their wing's state and the surrounding airflow, information that the brain can use to coordinate the complex muscular adjustments that the wing's architecture permits. When you examine these fundamental structural differences, the distinct design philosophies become clear. The feathered wing of birds is built around a rigid skeletal framework to which separate, replaceable surface elements attach. Each feather is a discrete unit that can be grown, maintained, and replaced individually. The structure achieves its aerodynamic surface through the arrangement and overlap of these elements rather than through a continuous membrane. The rigid framework provides a stable platform but limits certain types of deformation. The membranous wing of bats is built around flexible skeletal struts that support a continuous, living surface. The wing can deform in complex ways because the membrane itself contains the means of control, muscles, sensory receptors, and elastic fibers all integrated into the structure. The wing is not assembled from discrete parts, but rather functions as an integrated system where skeletal support, muscular actuation, sensory feedback, and aerodynamic surface are all aspects of a single continuous structure. Neither design is superior in an absolute sense. Each represents a different solution to creating a controllable surface for generating aerodynamic forces. The feathered design separates structure and surface, allowing modular maintenance and achieving certain types of stiffness. The membranous design integrates structure and surface, allowing complex deformation and providing rich sensory feedback. Both have proven successful through millions of years of evolution, each enabling its users to fly effectively while serving different ecological roles. The remarkable thing is that natural selection, working independently in two distant lineages, explored both of these fundamentally different approaches to wing construction, and both work magnificently. Chapter 3. Aerodynamics in Motion. Watch a bat chase a moth through a forest at dusk, darting, twisting, banking sharply around branches, and you're witnessing aerodynamic capabilities no bird can match. Yet follow that same bat on a cross-country journey alongside a migrating swallow, and the bird will arrive days earlier, having covered the distance with far less effort. This paradox reveals a fundamental truth about flight. There is no single measure of aerial superiority. The structural differences between feathered and membranous wings translate into fundamentally different ways of moving through air, different performance characteristics, and different capabilities that have shaped how each group exploits the skies. When a bird takes flight, the mechanics of its wing beat follow a pattern refined over millions of years. The powerful downstroke is where most of the work happens. Massive pectoral muscles contract, pulling the wing down and forward through the air. This downstroke generates both lift, the upward force keeping the bird aloft, and thrust, the forward force propelling it through the air. The wing moves at an angle of attack, with the leading edge slightly higher than the trailing edge, creating the pressure differential that produces lift. The primary feathers at the wingtip twist and separate slightly, each acting like a small propeller blade, converting downward motion into forward thrust. Then comes the upstroke, and here bird flight shows one of its cleverest adaptations. As the wing comes back up, most birds partially fold it, drawing it closer to the body. This folding serves a crucial purpose. By reducing wing area during the upstroke, the bird minimizes aerodynamic resistance that would otherwise oppose the upward motion. The primary feathers may separate during this phase, allowing air to pass between them, further reducing drag. The upstroke in most birds generates little useful aerodynamic force. It's primarily a recovery stroke, repositioning the wing for the next powerful downstroke. This pattern works beautifully for what birds do best: efficient, sustained flight. The rigid wing structure, with its carefully arranged feathers, maintains a consistent airfoil shape during the downstroke. The wing sweeps through the air as a relatively solid unit, generating reliable, predictable forces with each beat. For a bird engaged in cruising flight, this is ideal. Each wing beat delivers a solid pulse of lift and thrust, and the folding upstroke wastes minimal energy fighting air resistance. Bat flight operates on a different principle. The downstroke in bats also generates lift and thrust, but the membranous wing's flexibility allows continuous changes in camber throughout the stroke. The fingers can spread or draw together, changing wing area. Muscles in the membrane can adjust local tension, creating curves and pockets that manipulate airflow in complex ways. For a bird engaged in cruising flight, this is ideal. Each wing beat delivers a solid pulse of lift and thrust, and the folding upstroke wastes minimal energy fighting air resistance. But it's the upstroke where bat flight truly diverges. Bats do not fold their wings during the upstroke the way birds do. Instead, they twist the wing, rotating it so that the surface facing downward during the downstroke now faces partially upward during the upstroke. This twist happens because the fingers can move independently and because the membrane is flexible enough to accommodate this rotation without tearing. The result is that the upstroke in bats actually generates thrust. It's not a recovery stroke at all, but an active, powered phase of the wing beat cycle. This means bats generate useful aerodynamic force throughout the entire wing beat cycle, both down and up. The trade-off is that this requires more complex muscular coordination. The bat cannot simply let the wing coast back up. It must actively control the wing throughout the upstroke, manipulating its orientation and shape. This continuous active control is metabolically expensive, but it provides advantages that matter greatly to a bat hunting insects in a forest at night. To understand how these different mechanics translate into performance, scientists have developed sophisticated measurement techniques. Using wind tunnels, high-speed cameras, and particle image velocimetry, which visualizes airflow using tiny illuminated particles, researchers can precisely measure the aerodynamic forces that flying animals generate. These studies have revealed clear performance differences between birds and bats. One key metric is the lift-to-drag ratio, which tells us how much lift an animal generates for each unit of drag it must overcome. A higher lift-to-drag ratio means more efficient flight. You're getting more useful force relative to the resistance you're fighting. Birds generally achieve higher lift-to-drag ratios than bats, typically ranging from 10 to 15 in cruising flight, while bats achieve ratios closer to 5 to 8. Several factors contribute to this efficiency advantage. Birds generate surprising amounts of lift from their bodies, not just from their wings. The streamlined fusiform shape of a bird's body, with its smooth contours and the way feathers lie flat against the torso, creates an aerodynamic surface that contributes to lift. The body itself functions almost like a small fixed wing. Bats generate less lift from their bodies. Protruding ears and nose structures, called nose leaves, that many species possess for echolocation, create turbulence and disrupt smooth airflow over the body, reducing the body's contribution to overall lift. Another key difference appears in how lift is distributed along the wingspan. The most efficient wing generates lift relatively uniformly from root to tip. Birds approach this ideal fairly well. Their wings, with their tapered shape and carefully arranged feathers, produce a span-wise distribution of lift that is reasonably uniform. Bats, with their bodies generating less lift and their wings producing most of the force, have a less uniform distribution. This translates directly into efficiency. The bird wing wastes less energy to induce drag, the drag created as a byproduct of generating lift. Understanding these differences requires knowing two crucial parameters. Wing loading, the ratio of body weight to wing area, affects minimum flight speed and takeoff ability. Birds generally have higher wing loading than bats of similar size, which correlates with faster cruising speeds but makes slow flight more challenging. Bats, with their lower wing loading, can fly more slowly and hover more easily. Aspect ratio, calculated as wingspan squared divided by wing area, affects the efficiency versus maneuverability trade-off. High aspect ratio wings are long and narrow, like those of an albatross, providing excellent efficiency for gliding but limited maneuverability. Low aspect ratio wings are short and broad, like those of forest-dwelling bats, sacrificing some efficiency for tight turning ability. This single parameter captures much of the performance difference between the two groups. Yet, efficiency is not the only measure of aerodynamic performance. Maneuverability matters enormously, especially for an animal hunting agile prey in complex environments. Here, the bat wing shows its superiority. The continuous flexibility of the membrane wing, combined with independent control of each finger, allows bats to execute maneuvers few birds can match. A bat can turn so tightly that it essentially reverses direction in a space barely larger than its own wingspan. This agility comes from the ability to change wing shape asymmetrically, extending one wing while contracting the other, or altering the camber on one side to create differential lift. The hovering ability of some bat species showcases another aspect of their aerodynamic performance. Hovering is metabolically expensive for any animal. You're supporting your entire weight without moving forward through the air, which means you can't use forward speed to help generate lift. Some bat species can hover using their flexible wings to create complex vortex patterns that generate the needed lift. This ability is particularly useful for bats that feed on nectar or pluck stationary prey from leaves, allowing them to pause in mid-air while handling food. Speed represents another dimension where birds and bats show clear differences. Many bird species sustain flight speeds of 40 to 60 kilometers per hour during efficient cruising flight. Diving birds can reach even more impressive speeds. A peregrine falcon in a hunting stoop can exceed 300 kilometers per hour. Bats typically cruise more slowly, with most species flying at 20 to 40 kilometers per hour during foraging. However, some species can achieve remarkable bursts. The Brazilian free-tailed bat has been recorded in horizontal flight at speeds approaching 160 kilometers per hour, a truly astonishing velocity for an animal of its size. The reasons for the general speed advantage in birds relate back to wing structure and aerodynamic efficiency. The rigid feathered wing maintains its optimal airfoil shape at high speeds without deforming. Birds also possess adaptations in their respiratory and circulatory systems, supporting the high metabolic demands of fast flight. The flexibility that makes bat wings so maneuverable also means the wings can deform under aerodynamic loads. At very high speeds, the membrane might flutter or distort in ways that reduce efficiency. Interestingly, the energetic cost of flight is remarkably similar between bats and birds of equivalent size, despite their different wing designs and flight mechanics. Both groups burn energy at high rates during flight. The metabolic power required to stay aloft and propel yourself forward is substantial regardless of whether you use feathers or membrane. What differs is what that energy buys. Birds invest heavily in the downstroke, with relatively little cost during the passive upstroke. Bats distribute their energy expenditure more evenly across the entire wingbeat cycle, actively powering both strokes. The bird converts more of that energy into distance traveled. The bat converts it into maneuverability and control. Particle image velocimetry studies have revealed that bats create notably more complex wake patterns than birds. A bird's wake is relatively straightforward. During the downstroke, the wing sheds a vortex structure from the wingtip. These vortices form a pattern behind the flying bird that reflects the periodic nature of the wingbeat. The wake structure is efficient, with minimal turbulence and wasted energy. A bat's wake is messier, more turbulent, more complex. The flexible wings create vortices not just at the wingtip, but along various parts of the wing as it changes shape during the stroke. The active upstroke generates its own set of vortices that interact with those from the downstroke. The result is a wake containing more small-scale turbulence, which represents energy that isn't going into useful lift or thrust. This is another reason birds achieve better lift-to-drag ratios. Their wakes show they're converting more muscle power into useful aerodynamic force and wasting less in turbulent flow. Yet the bat's complex wake is not simply a sign of inferior design. That turbulence and those multiple vortices reflect the continuous adjustments the bat is making to its wing shape and position. The bat is constantly manipulating the airflow, creating and destroying vortices as needed to execute precise maneuvers. The extra complexity in the wake is the aerodynamic signature of agility. It's what allows a bat to change direction unpredictably, to slow down or speed up rapidly, to hover briefly and then dart away. The energy cost is higher, but the payoff in terms of flight control is substantial. These different performance characteristics make sense when you consider what bats and birds actually do in nature. Many birds engage in long-distance flight where efficiency is paramount. Every bit of energy saved means less food needed, less time spent foraging, and a better chance of completing the journey successfully. The feathered wing, with its high lift-to-drag ratio and efficient wake pattern, is superbly adapted for this task. Most bats are specialized for hunting small flying insects in cluttered environments. Picture a bat hunting in a forest, weaving between tree trunks and branches, pursuing a moth performing its own evasive maneuvers. In this scenario, the ability to turn quickly, to accelerate and decelerate, to hover briefly while orienting on prey, these capabilities are far more valuable than cruising efficiency. The membranous wing, for all its aerodynamic inefficiency compared to a bird wing, is the perfect tool for this job.
These patterns hold across most flying vertebrates, but nature always has exceptions that test the rules. Hummingbirds, despite being birds with feathered wings, have evolved the ability to hover and maneuver with extraordinary precision. They accomplish this through wing beat frequencies that can exceed 80 beats per second, far faster than most birds, and through a specialized stroke pattern where the wing moves in a figure-8 pattern, generating lift on both the forward and backward stroke. This convergence on bat-like hovering ability has required hummingbirds to sacrifice some of the efficiency advantages that most birds enjoy. Hummingbirds have among the highest metabolic rates of any vertebrate. They must consume vast amounts of nectar daily to fuel their energetically expensive flight style. Similarly, some bat species have evolved longer, narrower wings resembling those of birds adapted for efficient cruising. These bats, often species that forage in open air rather than in cluttered habitats, can achieve better sustained flight efficiency. Their wings are less flexible than those of forest bats, representing a trade-off of maneuverability for endurance. Even within the constraint of a membranous wing, evolution has found ways to adjust the design toward different performance goals.
When we step back and compare the overall aerodynamic performance of bats and birds, we're not seeing one design that is simply better than the other. We're seeing two different optimization strategies. The bird wing is optimized for efficient transport, for covering distance while minimizing energy cost. The bat wing is optimized for control, for maneuverability, for the ability to operate effectively in complex aerial environments. Each design pays costs to achieve its particular strengths. The bird sacrifices some maneuverability for its efficiency. The bat sacrifices some efficiency for its agility. The remarkable thing is that both designs work well enough that each group has thrived. Birds number over 10,000 species, occupying every continent and nearly every habitat. Bats number over 1,400 species, making them the second most diverse mammalian order after rodents. They've succeeded not by outflying birds in every metric, but by flying differently, by exploiting the aerial environment in ways that complement rather than directly compete with avian flight. The night shift in the insect world belongs largely to bats, while the day shift sees birds dominating the skies. Where they do overlap, in the crepuscular hours of dawn and dusk, their different flight mechanics allow them to pursue different strategies and different prey.
The science of comparing bat and bird flight mechanics continues to advance. New technologies for measuring forces, for visualizing airflow, for tracking wing movements at high speed are revealing details that were invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Each new study adds nuance to our understanding of how these animals accomplish the extraordinary feat of powered flight. What remains constant is the fundamental truth that birds and bats represent two successful but distinctly different solutions to the challenge of flying, each shaped by its evolutionary history and optimized for its particular ecological role.
Chapter 4. Efficiency and Endurance. When the Arctic tern leaves its breeding grounds in the far north each year and begins its journey southward, it embarks on one of the most impressive feats of endurance in the animal kingdom. This modest seabird, weighing little more than 100 grams, will fly from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again, covering a distance that can exceed 70,000 kilometers in a single year. Over its lifetime, which can span 3 decades, an individual Arctic tern may travel more than 2 million kilometers, roughly equivalent to 3 round trips to the moon. This extraordinary journey represents something that bats, despite their remarkable flying abilities, have never achieved and likely never could achieve. The difference lies in cruising efficiency, the ability to travel long distances while expending minimal energy. The concept of cruising efficiency encompasses more than just the aerodynamic properties of wings. It represents the entire package of adaptations that allow an animal to sustain flight over extended periods and vast distances. When researchers compare birds and bats on this measure, birds emerge as clear winners. This superiority is not a trivial difference, but rather reflects fundamental constraints built into the two different wing designs and body plans. The measurements are precise and telling. Birds achieve span efficiency values, a measure of how evenly lift is distributed along the wingspan, of approximately 0.8, while bats reach only about 0.6. This means birds waste less energy creating the vortices that trail from wingtips. These numbers translate directly into energy efficiency. For every calorie of fuel burned, birds extract significantly more distance traveled.
Several factors contribute to this efficiency advantage. The relatively uniform distribution of lift along a bird's wingspan reduces induced drag, the energetic cost of generating lift. When lift concentrates in certain areas rather than distributing evenly, more energy goes into creating turbulent vortices instead of moving the animal forward. Consider the wandering albatross, a bird that has taken the optimization of cruising efficiency to an extreme. With a wingspan that can exceed 3.5 meters, the longest of any living bird, the albatross has wings with an aspect ratio that rivals high-performance sailplanes. These wings are extraordinarily efficient at generating lift while producing minimal drag. The albatross exploits this efficiency through dynamic soaring, flying in a repeating pattern of climbing into the wind to gain altitude, then turning and gliding downwind to gain speed, then banking and climbing again. By skillfully exploiting wind gradients over the ocean surface, an albatross can travel thousands of kilometers without flapping its wings at all, extracting the energy it needs from the moving air itself. No bat has evolved anything resembling this capability. The membranous wing cannot match the efficiency of a long, narrow, rigid wing for sustained gliding.
The capacity for true long-distance migration separates birds from bats more clearly than almost any other aspect of their biology. Migration, the seasonal movement of animals from one region to another, has evolved many times in birds. Roughly 1 in 5 bird species engages in some form of long-distance migration, traveling from breeding grounds to wintering areas and back each year. The distances covered can be staggering. Bar-tailed godwits migrate from Alaska to New Zealand, a journey of over 11,000 kilometers that they complete without stopping, flying continuously for 8 or 9 days. Blackpoll warblers, small songbirds weighing barely 12 grams, fly non-stop from northeastern North America to South America, crossing more than 2,000 kilometers of open ocean. These journeys are possible because of a suite of adaptations that go beyond efficient wings. Before migration, birds undergo a physiological transformation. They enter a state called hyperphagia, a period of voracious feeding that can last several weeks. During this time, a small songbird might consume enough food to nearly double its body weight with fat deposits. A warbler that normally weighs 12 grams might reach 22 to 24 grams before departure, with the added weight being almost entirely fat. This fuel loading is critical. Fat contains more than twice the energy per gram of carbohydrates or proteins, making it the ideal fuel for sustained flight. The bird must carry enough energy to complete journeys that may last days without any opportunity to feed.
During the flight itself, birds can sustain activity for periods that would be impossible for most mammals. Part of this endurance comes from their respiratory system, which operates on a fundamentally different principle than that of mammals. Bird lungs are relatively small and rigid, but connected to a system of air sacs that extend throughout the body, even into some of the hollow bones. This creates a flow-through system where air moves in one direction continuously through the lungs. Fresh, oxygen-rich air is exposed to the lung tissue during both inhalation and exhalation, unlike the mammalian system of tidal breathing, where stale air always remains in the lungs. This unidirectional airflow system extracts oxygen from air far more efficiently than mammalian lungs. For a bird engaged in the energy-intensive work of sustained flight, this superior oxygen extraction capability is crucial. The flight muscles receive a steady, abundant supply of oxygen, allowing them to continue generating power for hours or even days without the kind of oxygen depth that would quickly exhaust a mammal performing similar work. Bats, being mammals, breathe with tidal ventilation. Their lungs are proportionally larger than those of birds of similar size, which helps, but they still cannot match the oxygen extraction efficiency of the avian respiratory system. This places a ceiling on how long and how intensely bats can sustain flight. While bats are certainly capable of flying for extended periods during their nightly foraging, they do not approach the multi-day non-stop flights that migratory birds routinely accomplish.
The difference in migratory behavior between birds and bats is stark. Most bat species do not migrate at all. They may move relatively short distances between summer and winter roosts, perhaps a few dozen to a few hundred kilometers. But this is a far cry from the intercontinental journeys of migratory birds. There are exceptions. The European noctule bat can travel over 1,000 kilometers between its summer range in northeastern Europe and its winter quarters in the southwest. A few North American bat species, including the hoary bat and the silver-haired bat, migrate from Canada to the southern United States or Mexico, distances of up to 1,500 kilometers. Yet even these more impressive bat migrations pale in comparison to what birds achieve routinely. The distances are shorter, the flights are broken into stages with rest periods, and far fewer bat species engage in the behavior at all. Researchers estimate that of the more than 1,400 bat species worldwide, fewer than 50 are truly migratory, in the sense that birds are. This represents about 3% of bat diversity, compared to roughly 20% of bird species. The efficiency factors drive much of this difference. Birds can cover more distance per unit of fuel, which makes long journeys more feasible. The crucial difference is what that energy investment purchases. For birds, a given energy expenditure translates into more kilometers covered because of superior aerodynamic efficiency. For bats, that same energy investment results in less distance but greater maneuverability.
Speed also constrains bat migration. During migration, birds typically fly at speeds that minimize the energetic cost per unit distance. At these speeds, a bird can cover substantial ground in a day's flight. If a bird flies for 10 hours, it might cover considerable distance. The slower speed of bat flight is not necessarily a problem for local movements, but it becomes a serious constraint for long-distance migration. The journey simply takes longer, requiring more total energy and exposing the animal to more risks. The energy budget of a long migratory flight illustrates these differences starkly. A bird preparing to cross a large ecological barrier, such as an ocean or a desert, must load enough fuel to complete the crossing without feeding. The amount of fuel needed depends on the distance, the flight speed, and the efficiency of the flight. A more efficient bird can make the crossing with smaller fuel reserves, or can cross a larger barrier with the same fuel load.
Consider a small bird and a small bat, each weighing about 15 grams in their lean state. The bird might add 15 grams of fat before a migratory flight, doubling its weight to 30 grams. With its efficient cruising, superior oxygen extraction, and optimized flight speed, this bird could sustain flight for 24 hours or more, covering perhaps 1,000 kilometers or more depending on conditions. A bat attempting a similar journey would face multiple challenges. Even if it could load the same proportion of fat relative to body weight, which is questionable given the need for the wing membrane to remain functional and the structural demands of carrying that weight on a membranous wing, the bat would burn through its fuel reserves more quickly due to lower cruising efficiency. It would also cover less distance in the same time period due to slower flight speed. The same journey that the bird completes in one marathon flight might require the bat to make multiple shorter flights with feeding stops in between. If no suitable stopover sites exist, as is the case over large bodies of water, the bat simply cannot make the journey.
Ecological considerations help explain why bats have not evolved to be long-distance migrants even beyond the physical constraints. Many bat species feed on insects, and insect availability in temperate regions plummets during winter. This would seem to favor migration to warmer climates where insects remain active. However, bats have an alternative strategy that most birds cannot use: hibernation. Bats can lower their metabolic rate dramatically, entering a state of torpor that allows them to survive months without feeding. They roost in caves or other sheltered sites where temperatures remain above freezing, and their metabolism slows to a tiny fraction of its active level. Over the winter, a hibernating bat might lose 20 to 30% of its body weight as it slowly burns through its fat reserves. But this is far less costly than attempting a long migration and then having to fuel an active metabolism all winter in a distant location. Birds, with their high metabolic rates and their limited ability to enter deep torpor, generally cannot use hibernation as a winter survival strategy. For the vast majority of bird species, migration is the only viable option when local conditions become unsuitable. This necessity has driven the evolution of the remarkable migratory abilities and the physiological adaptations that support them. The divergent strategies reflect the different constraints inherent in being a mammal versus being a bird. Mammals can regulate metabolism over a wide range and enter torpor. Birds, with their superior flight efficiency and endurance, can access migratory options that bats cannot.
The implications of these differences extend into ecology and evolution. The ability of birds to migrate long distances has allowed them to exploit resources that are only seasonally available. Arctic breeding shorebirds can take advantage of the explosion of insect life during the brief northern summer, then escape south before the onset of the brutal winter. Neotropical migrants can breed in temperate North American forests where food is abundant during summer, then retreat to Central and South American rainforests for the winter. This strategy of seasonal movement between regions has opened up ecological opportunities that have contributed to the tremendous diversity of birds. Bats, less capable of long-distance migration, have pursued different strategies. Many bat species have specialized to exploit niches that are available year-round in tropical and subtropical regions. The diversity of fruit bats in tropical forests, for instance, reflects the stable availability of fruiting plants in these environments. Temperate zone bats have evolved hibernation and the physiological adaptations that make it possible. Both strategies work, but they lead to different patterns of diversity and distribution.
The cruising efficiency advantage that birds hold over bats is not a minor detail, but a fundamental difference that has shaped the evolutionary trajectories and ecological roles of these two groups. It explains why birds dominate long-distance aerial migration, why they are found on remote oceanic islands that bats have never reached naturally, and why certain foraging strategies that require traveling substantial distances between roosts and feeding areas are the exclusive domain of birds. The measurements are clear. Birds achieve higher span efficiency, better oxygen extraction, and greater endurance. These advantages have opened doors that remain closed to the membranous wing, not through any fundamental inferiority of the bat design, but because evolution optimized each group for different tasks. The feathered wing excels at distance. The membranous wing excels at maneuverability. Both solutions have proven spectacularly successful within their respective domains.
Chapter 5. Day Shift, Night Shift. Stand outside on a warm summer evening just as the sun dips below the horizon, and you might witness one of nature's most elegant shift changes. As the last swallows and swifts dart overhead, snapping up insects in the fading light, dark shapes begin to emerge from crevices and caves. Bats take to the air, replacing the birds that are now settling into their roosts for the night. This daily handoff represents far more than a simple changing of the guard. It reflects a fundamental division of the aerial realm, shaped by millions of years of evolution and driven by the different sensory capabilities and ecological adaptations of these two groups. The temporal separation between birds and bats is not absolute. Some bird species hunt at dawn and dusk, and a few owls and nightjars are genuinely nocturnal. Similarly, some bat species, particularly certain fruit bats in tropical regions, are active during daylight hours. But the general pattern holds with remarkable consistency across the globe. The day belongs primarily to birds, and the night to bats. This division has allowed both groups to flourish, reducing direct competition and enabling each to specialize in ways that exploit their particular strengths.
The nocturnal lifestyle of most bats is intimately connected to echolocation, the remarkable biological sonar that has become their primary means of perceiving the world. The bat emits ultrasonic calls, often at frequencies far above the range of human hearing, and listens for the echoes that bounce back from objects in its environment. The time delay between emission and echo return tells the bat how far away an object is. The quality of the echo, its intensity and frequency characteristics, provides information about the object's size, shape, texture, and even what direction it's moving. A skilled echolocating bat can detect a moth-sized target from several meters away, track it as it moves, and intercept it with remarkable precision, all in total darkness. This sensory capability fundamentally changes the equation of nocturnal hunting. While some birds have excellent night vision, notably owls with their enormous eyes and high density of rod photoreceptors, they still require at least some ambient light to see. On a moonless, overcast night in a dense forest, even an owl's vision becomes limited. Bats face no such constraint. Their echolocation works equally well whether the night is bright or pitch black. This has allowed bats to exploit a temporal niche that is largely unavailable to birds. Yet echolocation comes with its own constraints that help explain why bats remain nocturnal rather than challenging birds for dominance of the daylight skies. The very adaptations that make bats supreme nocturnal hunters also constrain their performance in ways that would place them at a disadvantage in daytime competition with birds.
The diversity of echolocation strategies among bats reflects the variety of environments and prey they pursue. Some bats emit very loud, brief clicks, useful for detecting prey in open spaces where long-range detection is valuable. Others use quieter, longer calls suited for detecting insects in cluttered environments where too much echo from background vegetation would create confusion. Certain species have evolved extremely high-frequency calls that allow them to detect tiny prey like mosquitoes with great precision. Still others use frequency-modulated calls that sweep through a range of frequencies, providing detailed information about target characteristics. This sensory specialization for the nocturnal niche has, interestingly, evolved convergently in toothed whales and dolphins. Like bats, these marine mammals hunt in conditions where vision is limited, in their case in murky water or at great depths where light does not penetrate. The echolocation systems of bats and cetaceans are structurally quite different, but both systems solve the same fundamental problem of perceiving the environment through sound rather than light. Birds, being primarily diurnal, have taken a completely different sensory path. Their visual systems are extraordinarily sophisticated, in many ways superior to those of mammals, including humans. Birds can see a broader range of colors. Many species can detect ultraviolet light that is invisible to us. The density of photoreceptors in a raptor's retina can be several times that of a human retina, providing visual acuity that allows a hawk to spot a mouse from hundreds of meters in the air. Many birds also have two foveas in each eye, regions of especially high receptor density, giving them sharp focus both directly ahead and to the side. This exceptional vision serves birds well in their diurnal lifestyle and fundamentally shapes their hunting strategies. Visual predators benefit enormously from the ability to scan large areas and detect prey from great distances. A falcon soaring high above open terrain can survey vast stretches of ground, watching for the movement of potential prey. Once a target is spotted, the bird can dive at tremendous velocity, using vision to predict the prey's movement and adjust its trajectory mid-flight. This strategy of high-speed pursuit in open space, guided by acute vision, characterizes much of avian predation. It's a strategy that would be nearly impossible in darkness, no matter how sophisticated the echolocation system. The division between nocturnal and diurnal activity creates an elegant temporal partitioning of resources. Many insects are active throughout the full 24-hour cycle, but different species emerge at different times. Day-flying butterflies give way to night-flying moths as darkness falls. Diurnal mosquitoes are replaced by nocturnal species. By hunting at different times, bats and insectivorous birds can exploit different portions of this insect diversity without directly competing. A swallow catching mayflies over a river in the afternoon is targeting different prey than a bat catching caddisflies over the same river that evening. The dietary overlap between bats and birds is actually quite limited, despite both groups including many insectivorous species. This reflects not only temporal separation, but also fundamental differences in how and where they hunt. Birds, relying on vision, tend to hunt in more open habitats or along edges where sight lines are clear. Swallows skim over open fields and water. Hawks hunt from exposed perches with clear views of the surrounding area. Even forest-dwelling birds often focus their foraging along gaps in the canopy or in the understory where visibility is better. Their hunting strategies favor open space and good lighting. Bats, freed from the constraints of visual hunting and equipped with echolocation, regularly hunt in highly cluttered environments where birds struggle or cannot operate effectively. Dense tropical forests, with their tangle of vines and branches, present no particular problem for an echolocating bat. The bat can navigate through spaces that would be challenging even in daylight and simply impossible for most flying animals in darkness. This has allowed bats to access insect populations in the forest interior, in the canopy, and in other locations that remain largely unexploited by birds. Their superior maneuverability in confined spaces, combined with echolocation's ability to function in complete darkness, opens ecological opportunities unavailable to visual predators. Research has demonstrated just how remarkable bat maneuverability truly is. When navigating through cluttered environments, bats can recover from wind gusts and unexpected obstacles in less than one wing beat, making continuous micro-adjustments to their flight path. Seeing a bat in action has an almost surreal quality. One observer noted, "It's like seeing a shooting star, so speedy and unpredictable that even after you see one, you might question whether it was real." This agility allows bats to pursue evasive prey through complex three-dimensional spaces, where straight-line speed matters less than the ability to change direction instantly. Some bat species have evolved as gleaners, plucking insects from surfaces rather than catching them in flight. A gleaning bat might fly slowly above the forest floor, using echolocation to detect crickets or beetles on leaves or on the ground. When a target is detected, the bat performs a precise, controlled approach, sometimes even hovering briefly as it snatches the insect from its perch. This hunting technique exploits resources that are effectively unavailable to most birds, which cannot operate as effectively in the darkness and dense vegetation where gleaning bats excel. The structural environments where bats and birds hunt reflect these different capabilities and constraints. Birds dominate open habitats, forest edges, and areas where visual hunting strategies work well. Bats dominate cluttered environments, dense forests, and locations where the ability to navigate in complete darkness provides an overwhelming advantage. This spatial partitioning complements the temporal separation, further reducing competition between the two groups. Even in the same geographic location, bats and birds can coexist because they hunt in different places at different times, pursuing different prey using fundamentally different sensory systems. Seasonal changes in day length affect the relative availability of daylight versus nighttime foraging opportunities. In temperate regions during summer, days are long and nights are short, favoring diurnal species. In winter, the balance shifts with long nights and short days. This seasonal variation influences the abundance and activity patterns of both bats and birds in these regions. Many temperate bats respond to the twin challenges of long, cold nights and insect scarcity by hibernating, a strategy that allows them to survive extended periods without feeding. Most birds, unable to enter such deep torpor, must either migrate to regions where food remains available or switch to food sources that persist through winter. The coexistence of bats and birds in the same geographic regions demonstrates the principle of niche partitioning, where similar species reduce competition by specializing in different ways. Even when bats and birds overlap in diet, eating similar types of insects, they partition the resource along temporal, spatial, and sensory axes. The bat hunts at night in cluttered spaces using echolocation. The bird hunts during the day in more open areas using vision. Both strategies work and both groups thrive, together demonstrating that there are multiple successful ways to exploit the aerial environment. There are fascinating exceptions to these general patterns that illustrate the flexibility of evolution. Some tropical fruit bats, particularly the flying foxes, are diurnal. These large bats have excellent vision and rely primarily on sight rather than echolocation to navigate and find food. They fly during the day to fruiting trees, often covering substantial distances between their roosting colonies and feeding sites. Their diurnal activity puts them in potential competition with fruit-eating birds, and indeed, both groups can sometimes be seen feeding in the same trees. The fruit bats succeed in this niche despite being active during bird-dominated daylight hours, partly because of their size advantage. They can consume fruits too large for most birds to handle. Conversely, certain bird species have adapted to nocturnal hunting. Nightjars and their relatives hunt flying insects at night, relying on exceptional low-light vision and gaping mouths to engulf prey during aerial pursuits. They occupy a niche that overlaps somewhat with that of aerial hawking bats, but differences remain. Nightjars rely on vision, however acute, and so they typically hunt during twilight or on moonlit nights rather than in complete darkness. They also employ different flight strategies, often sallying from perches rather than engaging in sustained pursuit flights. Owls represent the most successful nocturnal birds, and their adaptations for night hunting are extensive. In addition to enormous eyes with high rod density, owls have evolved asymmetrical ear openings that allow them to locate sounds with remarkable precision. This auditory capability approaches echolocation in its utility for hunting in darkness, though it works passively, listening for sounds made by prey rather than actively emitting and receiving signals. An owl can pinpoint a mouse moving under snow based solely on the tiny sounds it makes, then dive and capture it despite the mouse being completely invisible. This hunting strategy allows owls to exploit the nocturnal niche successfully, though they still primarily rely on hearing and vision rather than echolocation. The fact that echolocation has not evolved in birds, despite their excellent hearing and the clear advantages it would provide for nocturnal hunting, suggests there are constraints or trade-offs that made this evolutionary path inaccessible or disadvantageous to birds. For bats, the evolution of echolocation appears to have been a key innovation that opened up the nocturnal insect hunting niche and allowed their tremendous diversification. This ability to hunt in complete darkness, freed from the constraints of visual orientation, was crucial to the early success of bats and remains central to their ecology today. The ecological roles of bats and birds extend beyond hunting insects. Both groups serve as important pollinators and seed dispersers, particularly in tropical ecosystems. Nectar-feeding bats pollinate a variety of night-blooming plants, including many species of cacti, agaves, and tropical trees. These plants have evolved flowers that open at night and often emit strong scents that help the bats locate them, adaptations that mirror the bright colors and daytime opening patterns of bird-pollinated flowers. The relationship between these plants and their bat pollinators demonstrates temporal niche partitioning at the level of plant reproduction. By flowering at different times, plants can potentially be serviced by pollinators around the clock, with birds visiting day-blooming species and bats visiting night-blooming ones. Fruit-eating bats and birds similarly fill parallel roles as seed dispersers. Both consume fruits and then fly to new locations before defecating or regurgitating the seeds, helping plants colonize new areas. The temporal separation between day-active frugivorous birds and night-active frugivorous bats means that plant-sparing fruit can potentially attract dispersers throughout the 24-hour cycle. Some tropical plants have even evolved to produce fruits that ripen at different times of day, maximizing the chances of seed dispersal by ensuring availability to both groups of dispersers. The predatory and competitive interactions between bats and birds are relatively few, given their temporal separation, but they exist. Some species of hawks hunt bats, typically catching them during the twilight hours when bats are emerging from their roosts. Certain bat species, in turn, are known to prey on small birds, particularly during migration, when exhausted songbirds may be vulnerable. These interactions are exceptions to the general pattern of peaceful coexistence, but they remind us that the division between day and night is not absolute, and that opportunities for cross-temporal interactions do occur. When we step back and view the global distribution of bats and birds, we see both groups represented on every continent except Antarctica. Birds have colonized Antarctica's coast during the austral summer, but bats have never established themselves there. Both groups have radiated into thousands of species, filling countless ecological niches. The fact that they have done so while partitioning the day into diurnal and nocturnal periods has allowed them to coexist with minimal competition. The size ranges of the two groups reflect different evolutionary trajectories. Birds range from species weighing just 2 grams to the 15-kilogram ostrich, while bats span from 2 grams to about 1.5 kilograms at most. This size difference likely reflects the fundamental constraints of membrane versus feathered wing design and the different selection pressures each group has faced. The story of bats and birds is not one of superior versus inferior, nor of direct competition for dominance of the skies. It is instead a story of complementarity, of two groups that have divided the available resources in ways that allow both to succeed. The bird, with its exceptional vision and capacity for efficient long-distance flight, claims the daylight hours and the niches that reward visual hunting and sustained travel. The bat, with its sophisticated echolocation and unmatched ability to navigate cluttered spaces in total darkness, claims the night and the niches that reward sensory independence from light. Together, they demonstrate that the aerial environment is vast enough and varied enough to support multiple successful strategies, each optimized for different conditions and different opportunities. In the daily handoff between swallows and bats at dusk, we witness not just a changing of shifts, but the product of millions of years of evolution exploring different pathways to success, each lineage perfecting its own approach to the ancient challenge of flight while learning to share the skies. The story of bats and birds reveals evolution's remarkable capacity for innovation. From completely different starting points, separated by hundreds of millions of years, these two groups independently conquered the skies, each developing its own solution to the challenge of flight. The bird's feathered wing excels at efficient, long-distance travel and visual hunting in daylight. The bat's membranous wing provides unmatched maneuverability and the freedom to hunt in complete darkness using echolocation. Neither design is absolutely superior. Instead, each represents a different optimization strategy, shaped by distinct evolutionary histories and ecological pressures. Together, they demonstrate that life's greatest challenges often have multiple viable solutions, and that success comes not from finding the single best answer, but from perfecting an approach that works within your particular constraints and opportunities. Thank you for listening.